We all really love a good triumphant movie ending. Like the heroes finally defeat the Empire, they make the exhausting journey back home, the swelling orchestral music plays, and, the screen just fades to black.
Right, it's clean. It's
Yeah,
incredibly satisfying.
exactly. It
Yeah.
leaves you feeling great. But think about what happens if the camera just doesn't cut to black. Like imagine we actually have to watch the unedited sequel.
Oh, the messy sequel.
Yeah. The heroes get back to their hometown after decades away, only to realize that, well, while they were gone, the roof of their ancestral house completely caved in.
The property taxes went up.
Miraculously tripled. The local government is this uh, bureaucratic nightmare, and nobody has the energy to rebuild anything. The triumphant music just stops, and this messy, grinding reality of everyday life fully sets in.
I mean, that is the absolute definition of historical hangover. You are describing a community that experienced the ultimate triumphant return, only to find themselves completely drowning in the mundane, frustrating, and honestly deeply cynical reality of the after.
Right. They survived the climax of the story, but now they just have to survive a Tuesday.
Exactly. And that right there is why today's mission is so compelling.
It really is. So welcome to a deep dive into a single, incredibly layered ancient document. Today, we are using this comprehensive survey compiled by Chris R. Velassi, and it's titled 039 Survey of the Book of Malachi. Docs.
We're unpacking the final prophetic voice of the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, which is a text that sits right at the literal and theological edge of the New Testament. It's just staring into this centuries-long abyss of silence.
It's a fascinating precipice to stand on because we're looking at a document that isn't just, some old dusty book of history. It actually operates as what scholars call a covenant lawsuit.
A covenant lawsuit.
Right, but it's one paired with an incredible, enduring message of hope. I mean, it was custom tailored for a community that was completely consumed by disappointment and, like you said, institutional cynicism.
So, for you listening, whether you're fascinated by ancient history or you're digging into theology, or maybe you just want to understand the very roots of modern struggles, like, trying to figure out why we should maintain our integrity when doing the right thing feels utterly pointless in a corrupt system. This deep dive is going to give you the complete picture.
We're getting into all of it.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start with the mystery of the author and this messy middle of history. We have this book called Malachi. Who actually wrote it, and what is the specific historical hangover they're dealing with?
Well, the name itself presents us with our first real mystery. I mean, Malachi translates from Hebrew simply as my messenger.
Just my messenger.
Yeah, the underlying Hebrew word is Malachi. And the scholarly consensus is actually quite divided on what this means in terms of physical authorship. So some scholars treat it as a proper personal name, assuming, the prophet's actual birth name was Malachi.
Okay, that makes sense.
But others view it purely as a title, literally just meaning my messenger, operating as this anonymous literary designation for whoever penned the text.
Wait, so it's entirely possible that Malachi wasn't a guy's name at all. It was essentially a job description. Like if I released a document and just signed it, the whistleblower or the correspondent.
That is a very strong possibility in ancient Near Eastern literature, actually. Certainty on his actual biography is simply unavailable to us. In fact, some ancient Jewish traditions even associated the book with Ezra the scribe.
Oh, really?
Yeah, given the massive overlap in the societal issues they both addressed. But the strongest historical anchor we have isn't the author's biography or, his signature. It is the undeniable geopolitical setting he is writing from.
Okay, so let's lay out that timeline, because the when basically dictates everything about the why of this text. The defining generational trauma for this community was the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonian Empire, which happened in 586 BCE.
Right. The city is leveled, the temple is burned to the ground, and the people are deported.
That is the exile. Then, decades later, the grand movie-ending moment happens. Cyrus the Great of Persia conquers Babylon. He completely changes imperial foreign policy and actually allows the exiles to return to Jerusalem. This is in 538 BCE.
And that return sparks the Great Restoration movement. So the exiles travel back, they start rebuilding the ruins, and finally, after a lot of false starts and stops, the Second Temple is completed around 515 BCE.
Wow, okay.
Now, earlier prophets, specifically Haggai and Zechariah, were the ones standing in the rubble urging the people to build that temple. They were promising that if the people built it, God's presence, global influence, and this massive blessing would return with it.
But based on the timeline in the survey, Malachi doesn't fit into that hopeful, adrenaline-fueled building phase at all.
Not at all.
The survey places the writing of Malachi much later in the mid-5th century BCE, so roughly around 470 to 430 BCE.
The adrenaline is entirely gone by this point. I mean, if we look at the insights from the Cambridge History of Judaism, the geopolitical reality of that specific window of time is just bleak.
How bleak are we talking?
Judah is no longer an independent, glorious kingdom. It doesn't even have its old name. It is now called Yehud. It is a tiny, incredibly vulnerable, tax-paying, tribute-bearing province that is just completely swallowed up inside the massive Persian Achaemenid Empire.
Okay, let me make sure I'm picturing this correctly. The people hearing these words are not the original exiles who wept when they saw the ruins.
Right.
They are the descendants.
Yeah.
They're the mid-5th century crowd. They have a temple. It's operating. The smoke is rising from the sacrifices. But the earth-shattering restoration they were promised in the ancient scrolls just hasn't happened.
Exactly. There is no descendant of David sitting on a throne ruling the nations.
They are basically middle management in a foreign empire.
They are entirely subject to foreign imperial rule. They have some local administration, sure, but they answer directly to a Persian governor. And the economic reality of Yehud is defined by agrarian struggle, local food scarcity, and crushing imperial taxation.
So they're farming just to hand their crops over to the empire.
Precisely.
Which threads perfectly into that movie sequel metaphor. Getting back home meant realizing the crops are failing and the imperial property taxes demand everything you grow. It completely explains the spiritual apathy of the people.
It does. It isn't just that they are lazy.
Right. They are dealing with profound religious fatigue and economic strain. And, when you mix exhaustion with poverty, moral compromise is almost inevitable.
The initial adrenaline of the restoration has just hollowed out from the inside. And because they are living in this disillusioned agrarian reality where obedience to the covenant doesn't seem to be paying the bills, they do what humans naturally do when they feel they have been sold a false bill of goods.
They complain.
They start arguing with God.
And that argument isn't just a theme of the book. It is the literal structure of the text. Because it's not written as a historical narrative, right?
Yeah.
Or like a poetic psalm. It is written as a fight.
Yes, the technical term scholars use is a prophetic disputation. The entire text is structured as 6 distinct, highly organized arguments between YHWH God and the people of Yehud.
6 arguments.
Right, and these 6 disputations are framed by an opening superscription and a closing epilogue.
The source material breaks down the rhetorical formula here, and it is a brilliant, repetitive mechanism. It works almost like a courtroom transcript.
It really does.
God makes a claim or an accusation, and the people immediately push back with this cynical defensive response. They say, but you say,
Yeah.
essentially demanding proof and challenging God's claim. Finally, God delivers the definitive answer that just dismantles their defense.
It is a remarkable structural marker. You see it repeated in every cycle. God says, you have done X. The people respond, but you say, how have we done X?
Wow.
It is the language of a legal proceeding, a rib in Hebrew, a covenant lawsuit, but it is also the painfully recognizable language of a deeply fractured relationship. Furthermore, the survey points out that these 6 disputations exhibit concentric or chiastic tendencies.
Okay, I want to stop there because chiastic structure is one of those academic terms that sounds pretty intimidating.
Because that's not intimidating, yeah.
How does a chiasm actually function in a text like this? What is it doing to the reader?
Think of a chiasm as a literary mirror or a set of nesting dolls. In a 6-part structure, argument 1 and argument 6 mirror each other's themes. Argument 2 and argument 5 mirror each other, and arguments 3 and 4 form the central core of the issue.
Okay, nesting dolls, I like that.
The literary effect isn't about building narrative suspense, like wondering what happens next in a linear story. The effect is designed to apply immense, compounding theological pressure.
So instead of just giving us a list of complaints, the author is building a trap.
Basically, yes.
If I'm following the nesting doll idea, let's trace it. If disputation 1 is the outer doll on one side, it must match disputation 6 on the other side.
Exactly. Disputation 1 deals with the foundational question of God's love and justice for Israel. Disputation 6, at the very end, deals with the ultimate vindication of God's justice for the righteous. They frame the whole book.
And then moving inward.
Moving inward, Disputation 2 exposes the corruption of the priests and the sanctuary. Mirroring it, Disputation 5 exposes the corruption of the people withholding their tithes from that exact same sanctuary.
Which leaves disputations 3 and 4 right in the center?
And those deal with the deepest societal rot, treachery in marriages, and the cry for a God of justice to intervene in a corrupt society. Every single human objection is met and systematically boxed in by divine speech.
It feels very similar to how we operate in our own internal monologues or, when we get caught doing something we know is wrong.
We throw up cynical defenses.
Yeah. We deflect, we ask for proof, we play the victim,
Yeah.
and the text just strips those defenses away, layer by layer, matching every excuse with a reality check.
Layer by layer.
So to see how this argumentative style truly functions, let's examine the very first dispute, which is located in Malachi chapter 1, verses 2 through 5, because it tackles the most fundamental baseline question a disillusioned person can ask. Does God actually care?
The dispute opens with a very straightforward declaration from God. He says, "I have loved you." But the people's immediate cynical response uses that exact formula. They say, "How have you loved us?"
They just don't buy it.
They don't. They are looking around at their tiny, struggling province, their heavy imperial taxes, their complete lack of a sovereign king, and they doubt God's love entirely. So God's response to this is to point to history, specifically to Jacob and Esau, which represents the neighboring nation of Edom.
Okay, this is where I have to push back a little.
Yeah.
Because this first argument uses language that is intensely jarring for a modern reader.
You know exactly what you're going to say.
The text says, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. And the Hebrew word there for hate is sane.
Yes, sane.
I mean, if we were talking about a faithful, loving deity, using the word hate regarding an entire lineage of people sounds incredibly vindictive. How does a scholar square that with the overarching narrative of a just God?
It is a crucial tension, and it trips up almost everyone who reads it through a modern emotional lens. But we have to read it through the political and legal lens of the ancient Near East.
Okay, explain that.
The survey clarifies that this is covenantal election language. It is an ancient idiom used in suzerain vassal treaties. It is not about an arbitrary emotional hostility or a psychological feeling of rage.
Wait, so God isn't sitting in heaven just seething with anger at the descendants of Esau?
No, not at all. In the diplomatic language of the ancient world, love and hate in a treaty context meant to choose and to reject.
Oh, wow.
God is pointing to his sovereign historical election of Israel, that's Jacob over Edom, that's Esau, to carry forward his redemptive purposes. He is creating a theological foil between Israel's continuous covenant election and Edom's historical judgment.
To give some context on Edom for a second, they were the neighboring nation that historically cheered and actively participated when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem back in 586 BCE.
Yes, there was massive historical bad blood there. And while Edom was later devastated by the Nabateans and left in complete ruins, Israel was miraculously allowed to return from exile and rebuild. So the point God is making is not about emotional vindictiveness. He is trying to wake the people of Yehud up.
He's saying, look at the big picture.
He's saying, look at the broader sweep of history. Look at my covenant commitment to you despite your current circumstances. Edom is a wasteland, but you are back in Jerusalem. My choosing of you is the definitive proof of my love, not your current economic portfolio.
Wow, that totally reframes it from an emotional outburst
Yeah.
to a binding legal reality. He is essentially saying, I kept the treaty.
He kept the treaty.
But once God establishes that baseline like, yes, I have chosen you, I am committed to this covenant, the argument immediately shifts gears in the second disputation. And this is where the mirror of that chiasm starts reflecting some really uncomfortable truths onto the leadership.
It does. This brings us to Malachi chapter 1, verse 6 through chapter 2, verse 9. The focus turns directly onto the priests, the custodians of the temple.
The leaders.
Yes. The premise is logical and culturally understood. A son honors his father, and a servant honors his master. So God asks, if I am a father, where is my honor? If I am a master, where is my respect? And the Hebrew word for honor here is kavod, which carries the idea of weight, significance, and glory.
And the priests hit back with the dispute formula. They say, but you say, how have we despised your name?
And God brings the literal receipts.
He does.
He points straight to the altar. The priests are bringing blind, lame, and diseased animals for the sacrifices. They're offering defective, blemished leftovers.
Which was a direct, blatant violation of the Torah, specifically the Book of Leviticus. And these priests were the very people legally ordained to teach and uphold that standard.
Exactly. And there is a brilliant, biting contextual detail right in verse 8 that the survey highlights. It's the Persian Devaner test.
Yes, I love this part.
God essentially tells the priests, go ahead, try offering that blind, diseased sheep to your Persian governor as your tribute payment. See if he's pleased with you or if he accepts you.
It just exposes their absolute hypocrisy. The Persian governor, or Right, collected taxes on behalf of the most powerful empire on earth
The priests wouldn't dare shortchange the imperial administration.
because the punishment would be swift and brutal. I mean, imagine trying to pay your modern property taxes with counterfeit bills or like expired gift cards.
I'd go to jail.
You would never do it because you respect the power of the IRS. But these priests think it is perfectly fine to offer those same counterfeit goods to the creator of the universe. It shows exactly where their fear and respect really lie. They fear the Persian Empire, but they treat God like a nuisance.
It's stunning. And the theological standard being established here is profound. The text insists that worship is measured by the worth of God, not by the convenience or the budget of the worshiper. The priests are offering what is cheap and easy. They are treating the altar of YHWH as something trivial, almost like a disposal site for the livestock they couldn't sell at the market anyway.
And because they are the religious and social leaders, their apathy isn't contained. It's totally contagious.
The priests had a dual role in this society. They weren't just butchers processing meat at the altar. They were the primary custodians of Torah instruction. They had pedagogical duties.
Meaning they had to teach the people.
Yes.
Yeah.
So by accepting and offering blemished sacrifices, they are failing cultically, meaning in their ritual duties. But more importantly, they're failing pedagogically. They are teaching the entire population of Yehud by their actions that God is simply not worthy of their best.
If the leadership demonstrates that the covenant is a joke, the community will inevitably follow suit.
They always do.
Which leads us to the terrifying realization that this kind of institutional apathy doesn't stay quarantined in the temple courtyard. It bleeds right out the gates, down the streets, and into the living rooms and households of the community.
Which brings us to the third disputation.
Right. So moving into the core of that chiasm we discussed, this is Malachi chapter 2, verses 10 through 16. It tackles a deeply personal and societal issue, marriage and divorce.
The survey notes a specific, highly charged Hebrew word used here, bagad, which translates to acting treacherously or dealing deceitfully. God accuses the men of Judah of acting treacherously against the wives of their youth.
Now, to truly understand the weight of this accusation, we have to recalibrate our cultural lens. Today, we view marriage primarily through the lens of private romance and individual fulfillment.
Sure.
If a marriage ends, it's viewed as a private tragedy or a personal recalibration. But that is not how the ancient world worked at all.
Not at all. The sociology of the Persian era was completely different. This was an honor-shame, patrilineal, agrarian society. Marriage was not merely a private romantic arrangement. It was a foundational, covenantal, and communal institution.
It was the bedrock of the whole society.
It tied families together, it ensured economic stability, it determined land inheritance, and it maintained the very social fabric of the community.
And the men of this community were faithlessly divorcing their Judean wives, seemingly to marry women from outside the covenant community, likely for economic or social advancement within the broader imperial system.
That's the most likely scenario, yes.
And I want to pause here for a second and just remind you, the listener, of a core rule of our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We were looking at a historical survey of an ancient text. We are not projecting this onto modern political or religious debates about family law or, modern divorce. Our goal is strictly to analyze what this text meant in its original mid-5th century BCE context.
And in that specific context, this behavior was a massive sociological and theological crisis.
Huge.
The survey explicitly connects this to the broader Ezra-Nehemiah crisis. You have to remember the numbers here. Yehud is a tiny, fragile, post-exilic micropopulation. Their entire survival as a distinct people depends on maintaining their covenant identity.
So it wasn't just a personal failing.
No, rampant divorce and intermarriage weren't just abstract social issues. They were existential, identity-threatening crises that could literally wipe them off the map through assimilation.
So when a man acted treacherously against his wife, discarding her to align himself with a foreign family, he was breaking a covenant in the home. But God views it as a direct reflection of their covenant infidelity to him.
The logic of Malachi is that you cannot compartmentalize your integrity. You cannot separate the domestic from the divine. Covenant betrayal in the home wounds the discarded spouses deeply, of course, but it also destabilizes the entire society.
Wow.
The text argues that if you cannot keep faith with the partner you have made a covenant with in your youth, the person you are closest to, you are demonstrating a fundamental rot in your ability to keep faith with God.
It's the realization that when covenants break down locally, in the family unit, The society begins to rot globally. And when a society starts rotting from the inside out, people look around at all the injustice, the pain, the brokenness, and they start asking a very dangerous question.
Which pulls us right into the fourth disputation.
Right. Stretching from chapter 2, verse 17 into chapter 3, verse 5. The people look at their world, a world they have actively helped corrupt, by the way, and they cynically ask, where is the God of justice?
They are tired of seeing the wicked prosper.
Exactly. They want God to step in, smash the system, and fix it.
But there's a massive blind spot here. They assume God's justice is only going to be directed outward at their enemies. They want God to destroy the Persian Empire and vindicate them.
But God's response is terrifying because it flips the lens right back on them.
He says, I am sending my messenger to prepare the way, and the Lord you are seeking will suddenly come to his temple. But he is not coming as a conquering general giving out participation trophies to Yehud.
No.
He is coming as a refining fire and a launderer's soap.
The theological irony here is incredibly sharp. The people are demanding justice, and God basically says, okay, justice is coming, but it is going to start right here in the house of Levi. He's coming to purify the priests first.
We really need to look at those two metaphors, refining fire and launderer's soap.
They sound painful.
In ancient metallurgy, refining silver required intense heat to burn away the dross, the impurities, until the silver was pure enough to reflect the silversmith's face.
And this soap.
An ancient launderer's soap, fuller's soap, wasn't a gentle detergent. It was harsh alkaline lye used to aggressively bleach and pound dirt out of raw wool.
Both metaphors imply an incredibly painful process of purification. And once the priests are purified, the judgment targets the rest of the community. And I find the specific list of targets here so compelling.
Oh, the list is fascinating.
The text says God will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, the adulterers, those who swear falsely, and crucially, those who oppress the hired worker, the widow, the fatherless, and the foreigner.
That list is paramount to understanding prophetic ethics. It mixes what we would categorize today as purely religious sins, like sorcery and false swearing, right alongside social justice issues, like oppressing the wage earner or exploiting the immigrant.
To Malachi, there is absolutely no distinction.
None. It is all one unified failure to fear God and uphold the covenant order.
Malachi just refuses to bifurcate the world into the spiritual and the secular. If you are exploiting your farm workers or cheating a widow out of her land, you are inviting the refining fire of God's justice just as much as if you were worshiping an idol.
Exactly. And immediately following this terrifying prospect of justice, in the fifth disputation, which is chapter 3, verses 6 through 12, God offers a path out of the fire.
A way back.
He says, return to me and I will return to you. The Hebrew word is shav, meaning to return or to repent. And predictably, the people deploy the cynical formula one more time. They say, but you say, how shall we return?
They want to know the exact mechanics of repentance, like, give us the checklist. And God's answer is startlingly practical. He doesn't ask for a prolonged fast or a complex ritual.
He points straight to their wallets and their silos.
He tells them they are robbing him by withholding their tithes and contributions.
The tithe, or ma'aser in Hebrew, was the mandated tenth of their agricultural produce. Under the Levitical system, this was meant to be brought to the temple storehouses to support the Levites, who had no land inheritance of their own, and to provide a safety net for the poor, the widow, and the orphan we just mentioned.
Now, I have to step in and push back on this on behalf of the listener, because context is everything here. We just established that Yehud is a tiny, struggling agrarian society.
They are very poor.
They are under heavy imperial taxation from Persia. They are dealing with droughts and local food scarcity. Every single piece of grain matters for their actual survival. Isn't God demanding a tenth of their food during a famine incredibly tone-deaf to their actual physical survival? It honestly feels cruel to demand food from starving people.
It is a profound tension, and it makes withholding the tithe a very understandable, highly rational human reaction. It was a survival mechanism.
Right.
When you are squeezed by the empire and the crops are failing, you hoard what you have. You protect your family first.
If giving the tithe means your children might go hungry, withholding it seems like the responsible thing to do.
From a purely economic standpoint, yes. But the text argues that this survival mechanism, while rational, is fundamentally built on a complete lack of trust in the covenant. The survey emphasizes that tithing here is not merely a fundraising scheme to keep the temple lights on.
Okay, then what is it?
It is a concrete, existential test of covenant fidelity.
How does giving away your food prove fidelity?
Because God challenges them to bring the full tithe into the storehouse and actually test him. He says, "Test me in this and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it."
Wow.
It is about proving whether they actually trust the Lord of hosts. The Hebrew title used here is YHWH Savatate, which stresses God's absolute sovereignty and cosmic power. He is asking them to trust that the commander of the armies of heaven can provide for them, even when their agrarian spreadsheets say they will starve.
It is a radical, almost terrifying call to trust. Bring the tithe, not because the temple needs your grain, but because you need to break your reliance on your own meager stockpiles. You need to remember who actually makes the rainfall.
Furthermore, remember the social function of the storehouse. By hoarding their grain, they were starving the Levites and the widows. Their fear-based self-preservation was causing the weakest members of their society to perish. Trusting God meant restoring the social safety net.
But even with this audacious offer of blessing like, test me and see, the people are still wrestling with a deep existential dread. They look at the math of their lives, they look at the corruption around them, and they arrive at a really dark conclusion. Living a good covenant-keeping life just doesn't pay off.
This leads us to the final, sixth disputation, which mirrors the first one we talked about. It runs from chapter 3, verse 13 to chapter 4, verse 3. The people finally say the quiet part out loud.
They drop all pretense.
They do. They say, "It is vain to serve God. What is the profit of our keeping his charge?" They look around and observe that the arrogant are blessed, and the evildoers not only prosper, but they actively put God to the test and get away with it unscathed.
It is the ultimate expression of human cynicism. Why bother being good if the bad guys are winning the game? It's the exact feeling you get when you play by the rules your whole life and you watch a corrupt politician or a ruthless CEO walk away with millions and zero consequences.
And how God responds here is incredibly moving and quite unexpected. Given the buildup, you might expect him to strike them with lightning.
Honestly, yeah.
But the text pivots. It says that those who feared the Lord spoke with one another, and the Lord paid attention and heard them. He eavesdrops on the faithful remnant, the small group of people who are struggling, who share the exact same cynical temptations, but are still trying to hold on to their integrity.
And God declares that a book of remembrance, a zikaron in Hebrew, is written before him for those who fear him.
This concept of the Book of Remembrance is deeply tied to the Persian context. Persian kings kept royal annals, administrative ledgers where acts of loyalty to the crown were recorded so that they could be rewarded later.
Oh, that's a cool detail.
God is using their own geopolitical reality as a metaphor. He is saying, I have a ledger too. I am recording your faithfulness. You are not forgotten.
He promises that a day is coming, the great day of YHWH, where the distinction between the righteous and the wicked will finally be fully, undeniably visible.
And the imagery used for this day is beautiful. For the wicked, the day comes burning like an oven, leaving neither root nor branch. But for those who fear his name, the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings.
It is a profound eschatological hope. Eschatological meaning concerning the end times or the final destiny of humanity. Malachi is basically saying, I know the ledger looks completely unbalanced right now. I know the messy middle is agonizing, but a day of final distinction is coming. Your faithfulness is recorded. The sun will rise.
That promise leads directly into the epilogue of the book, the final 3 verses of chapter 4. And this is where the text does something structurally and canonically magnificent. The epilogue gives 2 final commands to the listener. Remember the Torah of Moses and await the prophet Elijah, who is coming before that great and awesome day of the Lord.
This raises an incredibly important question about the canonical context of Malachi, meaning where this specific book physically sits in the broader library of the Bible, and why that placement matters so much.
Right, because in the Hebrew canon, Malachi sits at the very end of the Book of the 12, effectively concluding the section known as the Prophets.
But in Protestant Bibles, it's different.
Yes, in Protestant Bibles, it is the absolute final book of the entire Old Testament. You read these verses about Moses and Elijah, you turn the page, and you are immediately in the Gospel of Matthew.
The survey points out that this epilogue acts as a massive canonical bridge. Let's look at the 2 figures named, Moses and Elijah. Moses represents the law, the Torah. He brings the reader's mind all the way back to Mount Sinai, to the foundational covenant.
And Elijah represents the prophets. He brings the mind to Mount Carmel, to the explosive reforming work of God challenging corruption.
By invoking these 2 specific figures, Malachi ties the ancient past instruction to the distant future expectation. It acts as a clasp, holding the entire history of Israel together.
And it leaves the canon hanging. It doesn't wrap everything up with a neat bow. It leaves the reader with an unresolved expectation.
The Old Testament ends with a period of prophetic silence. Hundreds of years where no new prophetic books are written, but the door of hope is left wide open, waiting for this Elijah figure to step through.
For Christian theology, this seamlessly connects to the New Testament. The gospel narratives explicitly frame John the Baptist as this expected Elijah forerunner. Jesus himself says of John, he is Elijah who is to come.
Wow, it really is a direct line.
John the Baptist arrives in the wilderness preparing the way, and then Jesus arrives as the Lord who enters the temple, the messenger of the covenant who brings both the purifying fire and the healing in his wings.
The survey notes that, from a theological perspective, the gospel narrative isn't an interruption of Malachi's logic. It is the direct fulfillment of it. It takes the architectural blueprint Malachi drew in the Persian period and completes the building in the first century.
It is a stunning architectural feat of literature and theology. But before we get completely lost in the theological beauty of the text, we need to ground this in the dirt.
Yes, the dirt. Let's talk about the archaeology.
We have to ask the hard historical questions. Do we have actual physical evidence that this text was circulating, that it was real, and that the world it describes actually existed?
And we do. This is where we get to look at the historical receipts. What physical evidence do we have of Malachi's world?
Well, as the survey rightly points out, we don't have a personal diary belonging to a man named Malachi, but we have incredible textual and contextual evidence. Let's start with the textual history, specifically the Dead Sea Scrolls found in the caves of Qumran.
I know the Dead Sea Scrolls are a massive deal for confirming the antiquity of biblical texts in general, but did the archaeologists actually find anything related to this specific, somewhat obscure Book of Malachi?
They absolutely did, and it is vital for understanding how the text was viewed. In Cave 4 at Qumran, archaeologists found a manuscript known as 4Q76.
4Q76.
This is a scroll dating from the 2nd to 1st century BCE. It is a copy of the Book of the 12 Minor Prophets, and it physically preserves passages of Malachi.
Why is that specific fragment so important?
Because it physically confirms Malachi's established, stable place at the end of the prophetic collection long before the time of Jesus. It proves the text wasn't a later invention. It was an established authority.
But it wasn't just sitting on a shelf gathering dust, right? The community of Qumran was actively wrestling with it.
Exactly. We also have document 5Q10 from Cave 5, which is classified as an apocryphon of Malachi, and 4Q253, which is a commentary on Malachi.
They were writing commentaries on it.
These texts prove that in the Second Temple period, Malachi had a massive interpretive afterlife. It wasn't just preserved for the sake of archiving. It was analyzed, expanded upon, and treated with immense exegetical seriousness by Jewish communities living centuries after it was written. They were looking to Malachi to understand their own messy middle.
Okay, so the text itself has a verified historical footprint. But what about the physical world Malachi describes? He talks about a tiny, stressed-out province of Yehud governed by a Persian administrator. Does the dirt back that up?
The archaeological record backs it up with striking precision. We have found numerous Yehud stamp impressions from the Persian period.
How do stamp impressions prove anything about the society?
These were clay seals used on jars and official documents. They literally bear the name Yehud. Finding these proves that there was a highly organized local provincial administration answering to the empire, which perfectly aligns with Malachi's mention of a local governor who collects tribute. It wasn't a lawless wasteland, it was a heavily bureaucratized province.
And we also have the money. The survey mentions local silver coinage of Yehud from the late Persian period.
Yes. This is the era when the ancient Near East was transitioning from a barter economy to a coined money economy. Finding silver coins stamped with Yehud reflects the local economic life under imperial rule.
It makes it real.
It gives tangible, metallic weight to the economic strain, the taxation, and the agrarian pressure that Malachi is addressing. You need coins to pay imperial taxes, and getting those coins required selling your crops.
Which perfectly explains why they were hoarding their grain and offering cheap animals at the temple. And that leads to my absolute favorite piece of contextual evidence, the Elephantine papyri. How do papyri found all the way down in Egypt have anything to do with the prophet in Jerusalem?
It is a fascinating historical connection. The Elephantine papyri are a collection of Aramaic letters and legal documents found on the island of Elephantine in the Nile River, dating precisely to the 5th century BCE.
Okay.
They belong to a Jewish diaspora community living there, operating essentially as a military garrison for the Persian Empire.
So they were Jewish mercenaries working for Persia in Egypt. What did their letters actually say?
They are writing letters back to the leadership in Jerusalem, the exact leadership Malachi is critiquing. And these letters show this diaspora community navigating the exact same Persian imperial structures, dealing with intermarriage, handling property disputes, and navigating complex issues regarding their own local temple and priesthood.
It's incredible. It's like finding the tax receipts, the bureaucratic emails, and the interoffice memos from 2,500 years ago. It proves that the mundane, stressful, overtaxed reality that Malachi was preaching into was completely historically real. The Elephantine letters show a society dealing with the exact same compromises Malachi is attacking. He wasn't speaking into a void. He was speaking to a community drowning in paperwork, poverty, and assimilation.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of any historical or theological study. We have a historically grounded, textually verified, fiercely argued ancient text. We know what it meant to them, but what do we do with it today?
Right. So if we had to synthesize the so what of Malachi for a modern person, someone commuting to work or dealing with their own institutional frustrations, where do we land? Let's distill the major lessons.
I think the most piercing takeaway is how aggressively Malachi skewers the concept of consumer religion and ethical minimalism. Malachi looks at a culture, and it could easily be our culture today, that tries to neatly separate private devotion from public justice.
It completely dismantles the idea that you can be good with God in your heart while treating people terribly in your actual life.
Precisely. It refuses to let us separate our Sunday worship from our Monday workplace ethics. You cannot offer God a beautiful song on the weekend and then oppress your employees, exploit a loophole to cheat someone, or act treacherously against your spouse during the week.
It's all connected.
The covenant is entirely holistic. Malachi insists that leadership, especially, is judged strictly because leaders are the primary teachers of a community's values. If a leader lacks integrity, it doesn't matter how well the institution functions on paper. The core is rotten.
And it highlights a really dangerous psychological trap: familiarity breeding contempt. The priests in Malachi weren't atheists. They believed in God. But they were so used to the holy things, so accustomed to the mechanics of the altar, that it became just another boring part of their daily routine. They lost their reverence.
Which is a profound warning for anyone who has grown up in a tradition, an institution, or a long-term relationship. When the sacred becomes mundane, when the extraordinary becomes routine, ethical compromise is never far behind.
Yeah.
Malachi calls for an all-encompassing fidelity. Everything belongs together. How you worship, how you work, how you treat your family, and how you handle your money.
It is a comprehensive vision of a life lived with integrity, even when the system is broken. Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We have traveled from the smoking ruins of Jerusalem in 586 BCE through the bureaucratic maze of the Persian Empire into the fierce six-part courtroom drama of Malachi's disputations.
We have looked at the archaeological dirt of Qumran in Egypt
And arrived right up to the edge of the New Testament with the promise of a coming messenger.
We've explored the depths of covenant love, the harsh realities of justice, the challenge of the tithe, and the enduring hope of the Book of Remembrance.
I want to thank you, the listener, for joining us on this deep dive into the historical, literary, and theological depths of the Book of Malachi. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We started this journey by talking about the messy middle, that grinding reality of living in the unedited sequel after the triumphant movie ending. When the roof is leaking, the taxes are high, and the enthusiasm is gone. The Book of Malachi leaves its original audience and us in a profound state of tension. It commands us to look backward, to remember the ancient past of Moses and the foundational rules of the relationship, while simultaneously looking forward, waiting for the distant future of Elijah and the rising sun. Think about your own life right now. When you find yourself stuck in that messy middle between a promise from your past and a fulfillment in your future, when the silence feels deafening, when the daily routine is exhausting, and the cynicism starts creeping in because the bad guys seem to be winning, how do you maintain your integrity? Does the waiting make you cynical, causing you to offer up the stale leftovers of your time, your energy, and your love? Or does that waiting refine your character like a fire, stripping away the dross and preparing you for the day when the sun of righteousness finally rises? Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.